My name is Sally Lehman, and my title is Using Other People's Modules, and I grew up around here. I have driven all over the state, and this weekend, if you have some time, the most beautiful place in Oregon is only 30 minutes out in the Columbia Gorge. So rent a car and take a look. That's really awesome. Thanks a lot for coming to my talk. I'm first going to introduce myself, even though I was introduced. I go by Rasta on the internets, and you can find me tweeting a lot on Twitter. I graduated in 2009 as an electrical engineer and started working for Mad Mimi, which is an email marketing company. I did a lot of ops stuff there, and I then moved to GitHub. And when Mad Mimi was acquired by GoDaddy, I moved back to Mad Mimi and launched the GoDaddy email marketing service on the GoDaddy servers using Puppet and set up their CI/CD, and that was just this year. So what I'd like to communicate today is about module management, why you need it, and how to select modules that will fit your needs and so that you can contribute to the Forge. And the reason that this is important for other people's modules is because you have to, when you're dealing with a large number of modules, you can't just use the Puppet module install at a certain point. There's a lot more to it. So when you first, this talk is more for someone who is beginning and you understand the concept of a module as a self-contained piece of code. And it has ideal inputs and outputs, and then you get to adding lots of modules together, Apache and NTP and a proxy, and they all fit together perfectly and are nice and neat and orderly, right? Well, yeah. So, the reality is that it gets pretty messy. There's a lot to keep track of, and anything you can do to decrease your entropy is a good thing. So what you need is a module manager to take care of these modules, and now that the Forge has had lots of time to develop, it makes a lot of sense, a lot more than it did, to use upstream modules. And for that, you need a manager to keep your code neat and collaborative. So you'll want to update with them with lots of different sources. You're going to be coming from GitHub, the Forge, maybe your own local GHG and your own local repositories. So the three tools that I'm going to talk about, I'm talking about mainly because they're used generally in enterprise, not because I recommend all of them, and you'll see that I don't. So the three that I'm talking about that are kind of a box for your modules are Git Submodules, Librarian Puppet, and R10K. And what else I'm also going to talk about is there's kind of a story of a migration from Submodules to Librarian to R10K and how that came about. So first, I'm going to talk about Git Submodules. The reason that I have a waffle cone up here is because Git Submodules, if anything, what they are is brittle, and a waffle cone is brittle. So that's my image for trying to remember what Git Submodules are about. And the reason that Git modules are brittle is because they are super option heavy. They're good at linking a single commit to a single repository, and just they're good for static stuff. But as soon as you start moving things around, it gets messy really fast. So here I'm just going to demo what it looks like to use Git submodules in a repository, just to add and remove a submodule. So I've just got a VM on DO here, and all I had to do was install just a couple things. It's a CentOS, and so I'm installing to the modules proxy directory, and I typoed. And so you can see I've got a Git modules directory now, and the file, and the proxy. The proxy has a little commit SHA attached to it that associates it with the module that I'm referencing that's remote. So when you add that submodule, you have to also init, and that adds it to the main Git tree of your repo. If you don't, then it's not hooked up. So now I'm going to remove that module. And here's where you can start to see that submodules gets a little messy. This is going to take 4 different commands just to take one module out. And while there is a dinit or some sort of removal, it's not total, and it can cause problems. So it's just better to get rid of it entirely. So I'm removing it from cache, and from the Git tree, and then the main folder. So there's a lot there. Adrian Thebo has a website, somethinginistrel.net, and he's got several flows where you can see where he does a branch and a commit, and if you forget just one step in the whole setup, then you break your master. So there's lots of examples here, and in practice, when you're just committing just to get things done, and you're not necessarily being very careful and thinking about every single step and the implications of such, it just gets you in a lot of trouble. So the pros of Git submodules: you can do just about anything you want. There's hundreds of options, and it's not meant just for Puppet, so you can and it's part of Git itself. Adrian was also saying, and I'm not sure where, I couldn't find a source for this myself, but he said Linux or Linus wanted them, and that's why they're in there. And so another thing is they don't take over your modules directory. Maybe you want that control. It tends to cause more problems than not. It's usable for any Git repo, and it's not specific to Puppet. So if you're used to using it and you know everything there, then maybe might be a good option for you. Well, the cons are about the same. You can do just about anything you want. You will end up forgetting what the method is to do it, and you'll do it slightly different, and then it'll take a long time to fix. It doesn't take over your modules directory. Now you have 2 places. You have the local folder, and then you have the remote repository, and someone makes changes in one and not the other, and things get confusing. As I was mentioning before, it's just lots of different ways that you can make things hard to remember. And it doesn't have any sort of Puppet-specific stuff, like it doesn't have metadata.json or dependency resolution. So as you gathered, I don't really recommend Git modules, but lots of people still use them, so I'm covering them, and maybe you'll see this usage in your work at some point. So this is the repo, or the website tagline for Library and Puppet is, you can all stop using Git submodules now. Because this is kind of the successor. It was started in 2012 by Tim Sharp, Rajek there. And it's now maintained by Carlos Sanchez. And even though it's been around for a while and there's a successor to it, it's still pretty active. It's built off the Applications Online / Librarian Bundler framework, which Bundler is also built from, and it's in Ruby. So the analog from your .git modules file is the Puppet file. And the Puppet file has a bit nicer of a syntax there. It's got a .lock in Librarian Puppet, like your gem file .lock. It's got a recursive resolver. And that is based on metadata.json or module file if you're on an older version of Puppet. Dependency resolution is not perfect, but neither is, there's not a tool yet that is perfect that I know of. And you're not messing with hidden files or Git internals. So here's how to use Librarian. It's a lot easier. It's very simple. One thing is that you'll need to, it will take over your modules directory. So you'll need to make sure that all of your custom modules that maybe were sitting there as if you do have tendencies towards a monolithic repo, those need to have their own repository. And then you'll need to build your Puppet file, although Librarian init will give you an initial one. And you could just remove your old modules directory to be final about it. And then once you have your Puppet file, you just say Librarian Puppet install, and it will install modules and create a Puppet file.lock, just like I was saying, gemfile.lock. So here's a little demo of how you might add and remove a module with Librarian Puppet. So I'm just going to use the default Puppet file that is initialized with Librarian Puppet. You can see the other thing that init does is add the temp and modules directory there. So just going to uncomment one of these modules here. I didn't have a metadata, so I just commented that out. And now I'll just have a new module sitting in there. And all I have to do is do a show, or if I go into the modules directory, then it'll show up there. So now going back and the same command. I just have to install again, and that will remove the module. So I can specify my refs or my branches in that Puppet file, and it'll take it from there. So the pros of Librarian Puppet, it's simple and it's straightforward. You install a gem, you populate your Puppet file with your modules, and you install, and that's it, basically. It has recursive dependency resolution. It has a lock file, so that for the same reasons you might have a gem file lock. And it helps encourage some good practices there where you're moving your modules out to a remote repository. So the cons. This is not a con for everyone. It doesn't have a deploy and environment-specific feature. its caching method is not fast enough because it does go over, it does fetch more often than it may necessarily need to. You can't, if you do want to use your modules directory and modify that yourself with custom stuff, then you can't. The alternative, if you're really stubborn, is to use a site folder and pull that in, because you can pull in by a path if you want to. So the verdict is, with Librarian, it's a nice, simple tool to, if you want something that just does just one thing, then to manage your modules, then and it's not overly opinionated, then this is a good option for you. So somebody got frustrated with Librarian Puppet, and that's Adrian here. He was using Librarian Puppet on a very large infrastructure, and he got frustrated with the slowness of the caching, and he had to hack up his own deploy an environment solution with Librarian Puppet, and it was really awkward and just not working at the large scale that he wanted. So he wrote R10K, which is, it stands for Robot 10,000, which is successor to Robot 9,000, which is, I'm not sure what that was, but it's over 9,000. So the module management is actually, it's almost more secondary. Like, this is a workflow. This is, it's for Puppet deployment. Like, this is not for what it is, it's simple to work with, but there's kind of a lot there in comparison. So it's like Librarian in a lot of ways, because it's a little bit, it's kind of a successor. So modules need to be in separate repos. And there's a main repository called the control repository. It also reads off a Puppet file, but it doesn't have a Puppet file lock. It doesn't have dependency resolution. So how do you use R10K? So here are some common commands that you might use for installing a Puppet file on the Puppet master. Then this is the command you would use. Probably the main command you would use is R10K deploy environment. There's lots of options to specify per, so you can save some time if you're deploying deploying something large. So here you can deploy specific module to production. And let me show you a little demo. So there's a lot going on behind the scenes here. I used the quick start to set this VM up, but it still took me about 2 hours to get everything set up, because I need an R10K YAML, I need my Puppet master configured. For this dev environment, there's a whole bunch of different things that R10K requires that I have to actually make things work. But there's a good, because it's so opinionated, that can be really good for someone who's a little bit newer, so that you're not trying to figure out what your deployment workflow is on your own. So here I'm just editing the exact same Puppet file as my Librarian Puppet. I just left that there. I left the lock there too, because you can use them. They're not going to conflict with each other, so if you want to try both, you can. So what I'm doing is I'm committing a change to that Puppet file and pushing. I had another thing that I did in that setup is I was creating all my environments, so that because I had to configure the environment.conf as well. And so now I'm just going ahead and removing that module again. That's pushing up to GitHub. And then my Puppet master lives on this VM, and I'm telling it to deploy the environment. and just removing that module just on that prod branch. So R10K is integrating your module management, but per environment. It allows you to be very granular and can help. Once you start scaling things to a significant degree, then that can make a lot of sense. So what's great about R10K? It's a one-stop shop for module management, and it's built just because it's built specifically because of some scaling issues that Adrian ran into. What's not as good about it? Oh yeah, I should probably finish pros here. It's great with caching, so it caches per environment. And there's lots of documentation. It's supported by Puppet Labs. There's lots of stuff coming out for it, and it's going to be going to keep getting better. So what's not so great about R10K? It's very opinionated. It's going to tell you how you do have configs, but it's going to tell you how your deploy workflow is going to work. It doesn't have dependency resolution, which I think he probably didn't include because maybe there was some worry about that working just right, but that might be something you want. And it takes a good amount of reading and understanding how your whole environment works before you can actually use R10K. I think that it's worth it, and you probably should. It's just you got to think that there's going to be some reading and lots of time spent to understand what's going on before you get a payoff. So the verdict with R10K is it's probably best in most cases, but you can use it at the same time as Librarian Puppet if you want to take advantage of or play with both. And you can use the dependency resolution of Librarian if you want locally, and it can be a good thing for dev. All right, so we've been over Git modules, Librarian Puppet, and R10K. And so hopefully you have a little bit of an idea of how you might use those. So that's not all of using other people's modules. You also need to be able to identify ones that are going to be useful for you. There's a guy named Lucas after me whose talk is specifically on this, and what I'm covering right now is just some things to get you started. I don't consider it all, I'm just a few things that I've run into myself when I started using modules from the Forge. So the first thing is, well, Puppet, yes, I mean, it's cross-platform, but you definitely need support in most cases for your particular OS if you're installing a module, and it can take more time than you expect to handle that. So you want to look for some operating system support on the metadata.json. For older modules, there can be an if statement somewhere in the code saying that hopefully will fail if your operating system is not supported. The second thing is when you want to actually use a module, you don't want to have to, when you're writing that code, maybe you're going to look over the module, but you don't want to have to write code that digs way down and grabs into templates to actually adapt your code. You want something where everything is on the top class. So here is the NTP module on the Forge and some documentation. This is really amazing documentation where it just, here's the absolute basic stuff that I need. Here's maybe a little bit more options. And then the best thing is actually at the bottom where you have a whole, where say those options don't work for me, that they pulled up using the params.pp file. I can pass in a config template of my own. The last thing that I wanted to mention is, so is this module going to be good for adding features? When I invest in this module and I'm configuring my environment around it, is it going to work for me when it doesn't have something I need? So the first thing you look for is lots of active users. There's lots of modules that are a little bit lower. You can see there's going to be the activity on the Forge as well as GitHub. Is the owner going to be responsive to you? And are they going to actively include your code? And is there lots of documentation of internals? So maybe I don't want to dig deep into the code to use it, but I do want to understand the structure behind that module and how it works so that I can adapt and work the same way. So what you've learned today, what I really hope that you get out of this is, now that you've seen these module management tools work, I want you to use them, and they will help you use other people's modules more easily, and you won't have to worry about as much work with keeping them up to date. And so hopefully that's something you've picked up, and hopefully you have learned some things about what is important for selecting a module from the Forge. So that's it for my talk. I would like to thank the people here on the screen for their really awesome blog posts and the really amazing Puppet documentation on the website. So with that, I can take questions. If you could raise your hand if you have any questions you'd like to ask.
So out of the modules you used from the Forge, how many were not the supported, was it supported or approved? How many were not out of those categories?
I would say half. The more popular one is, the more it's going to have support.
So that's my next question is, once you go out of those modules that aren't in those categories, I find that I could find a whole lot of different ones that are basically the same, but how did you choose, how did you research and understand exactly which one you wanted to go to? Does that make sense?
Yeah. I think I would go out to GitHub and see whether there's activity on the repo there. I think just playing with it locally a little bit would probably be what I would do. That's all.
Okay.
Right there.
So I have a couple new questions. So your whole point in the management of the modules is that that's going to automatically sync the latest versions of those modules when they come in, or, I mean, I guess I'm kind of missing the point.
So what it does is it gives you that one command to do an install of the Puppet file. So you can do an update for those modules if you want to.
Okay. And then can you go back to the NTP slide example? Because one of the things I'm struggling with is I look at these modules, and when I see documentation, your NTP servers are hard-coded in that definition. So if I'm going to module manage and bring in a new module, won't that just overwrite all the things I've just hard-coded in that, like in that example?
Well, you can pass in from the manifest or from your roles and profiles pattern, and so that's what you would do.
When I look at those examples, they look
Oh, okay, yeah, so something specific like that might be in your HIRA.
How do you contribute back when you have to put in local modifications to support your company? How do you split your Git workflow in order to be able to contribute both to your company and to the community?
Okay. Well, you want to have an account on the Forge and on GitHub, and I think that one of the big steps is pulling out your site-specific data with HIRA data for module management. I think that you're still going to have to follow the fork and pull request flow, but you still want to be able to use your module management tool for your system, and maybe once you sync up your changes, then you can update your tool. Any other questions? Okay. All right. Thanks. I really appreciate you listening to me, and I have been excited to give this talk, and I hope you have a really awesome weekend. Thanks a lot.